Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another SEJ Marketing Think Tank webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about an interesting topic. We're going to talk about nostalgia and why nostalgia works so well in marketing with Kelsey Jones today. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting presentation. I got a chance to, I always get a chance to kind of see these ahead of time. And so there was a couple notes that I definitely took from it. So interesting discussion point. Before we jump in and get started, my name's Brent Satoris. I'm going to be the moderator. I'm going to let Kelsey do a little introduction for herself, and then we'll get into some housekeeping items. Kelsey?
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. So hi, everyone. As Brent said, my name's Kelsey Jones. I am the executive editor at Search Engine Journal. I have about 7 years of marketing and PR experience, 11 years in journalism and editing, and my main responsibility at SEJ is that I drive our entire content strategy in order to drive traffic and increase community engagement. And I also want to add, I have my retro shirt on for the event Star Wars, so I'm a huge Star Wars fan. That's probably my favorite blast from the past. So Brent, take it away.
The fun thing with Star Wars is they've reinvented everything so much. So it's like blast from the past for some, and it's like, oh, that's last week for some others, right?
Yes, that's true. Though any movie that has Jar Jar Binks in it, I'm not counting as a Star Wars movie, so
True. I don't
take
think
it from that as you
I
will.
think they said something about killing him off in this next one. But anyway,
Okay, good,
we'll get lost in that. So housekeeping items. If during the webinar you have any questions, comments, experiences, tidbits you want to add, anything that would be considered appropriate to type out and put online, you definitely can participate with this webinar by using the hashtag on Twitter, SEJ Think Tank. You can see it in the presentation throughout at the bottom of the slides. And you can also use the question box within the webinar itself. Throughout the presentation, we're going to have a number of poll questions. This is your opportunity to participate. Give us your feedback, give us your opinion, answer the questions, and get involved. We're going to do our best throughout the presentation if there's mention to tools or various different resources to put the links within the webinar chat itself and also on Twitter. But if we miss something, just let us know and we'll make sure we get that link out there. The entire webinar, all the links, all the questions, literally everything is going to end up being recapped and summarized so that and then published on SEJ in the next couple days. I think we've gotten pretty quick about it, so it might be within the next day. So everything's going to be there for you. You can recap, you can share it with others, you can get all the information you need from that. But without any further ado, let's jump into talking about nostalgia and marketing. Kelsey.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent. So today we're just going to cover basically a primer on what is nostalgia marketing. Sometimes people call it retro marketing. I think nostalgia marketing is kind of more of an accurate term. And then I'm going to break it down a little bit into building that nostalgic concepts into your content marketing and also your social media. So first, just a little primer on what is nostalgia marketing if you haven't heard of it or really used it before. So basically, it is using themes or products or ideas from the past in your current marketing now. So that might be posting things that happened previously, and it kind of creates a sense of emotion and people recalling where they were at that time, and it just generates kind of a unique emotional feeling that most people can't get anywhere else. It also involves maybe using retro themes in your current product. So I'll talk about that with a few examples later, but just kind of, new products that have a kickback or throwback feel to them, that also ties into nostalgia marketing as well. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about why nostalgia is so appealing to people and why it works so well. The reason why adults feel such a really good connection to their teenage years is because our brains, on a scientific level, were actually still developing during then. So we felt emotions at a stronger level when we were teenagers versus adults. So that's why the emotional connection to what happened when we were teenagers is so much more felt even now as an adult. I also think, too, that nostalgia is so appealing because when you were a kid, you really didn't have any responsibilities. I didn't have a job till I was 16, so I would spend summers going to the pool, hanging out with my friends. And sometimes when you're an adult and life gets in the way and it's so busy, crazy, you think about, or at least I do, those awesome summers where you didn't have to do anything and worry about a mortgage or making sure the whole house was clean or things like that. Those are things your parents usually worried about. I also think nostalgia can be triggered during life transitions, which has also been scientifically proven. So if somebody's moving to a different city, if they get married, when they have kids, those huge transitions, graduating high school, moving to college, those also trigger a sense of nostalgia as well. So if your target market is going to be going through those transitions, nostalgia is an even more powerful marketing strategy for you. Nostalgia has also been shown to be a coping mechanism whenever you're stressed. So if you feel lonely or stressed, people will go back to the times in their life where they felt happy, and it gives them a sense of comfort and calm. And a really cool study I read about was that study participants, when they listened to their favorite songs from 20 years ago, they had a sense of that they felt more loved and felt a better sense of belonging because those songs from 20 years ago triggered an important emotional connection in them. So nostalgia is a really powerful emotional pull that you could use to connect with your audience. I also wanted to talk a little bit about brands that are using nostalgia marketing today. It's a really popular thing. So two good examples are Pepsi and Nike. So Nike releases retro versions of their sneakers almost every year, and they become a collector's item. So they're going to be styles that were cool in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now they're being re-released. So they're brand new sneakers, but they have that retro throwback, and people love that. Similarly, Pepsi released soda that has real sugar in the original recipes from, the 60s, 70s, 80s, and they labeled it a throwback series. And Coke has done that as well and used real sugar in their recipes. So those have been proven to be so popular that they've even expanded it to their other soda flavors like Mountain Dew or Sprite, using original packaging, mascots, things like that. So it really has been shown to be a powerful product development and marketing tool as well. So one thing that I really want to impress upon you guys as to why nostalgia marketing is such a powerful tool is because your audience is looking for that blast from the past, solely because of those reasons I just discussed. They want to feel happy, loved, like they were a part of something, especially in times of stress. So it's storming, so if you hear the thunder, sorry about that. So I wanted to mention right now the 90s are back in huge in fashion, marketing, music. People are really loving the 90s, especially if that's when they grew up. So if you're looking for a nostalgic campaign that would get a lot of traction right now, anything from the 90s has a really big pull right now. And I included a photo of the Spice Girls because they were my jam in the 90s. I want to say if you're looking for the right decade to target, you should choose a time of when your target audience was ages 6 to 16. That 10-year time span is usually when people are most nostalgic because it was their childhood to their teenage years. So that's kind of an easy indicator to figure out what era you should be targeting. One other really cool example that I wanted to share about a successful marketing campaign that was based on nostalgia and actually driven by a products community was Surge. So Surge was this really popular soda, I think in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, that Coke released. And it was basically Mountain Dew on steroids, and it was delicious and gross at the same time, but they stopped making it. So the community of Surge drinkers still remembers that soda even though it was 20 years ago. They actually, a bunch of people created an Indiegogo campaign to buy a $4,000 billboard near Coke's headquarters in Atlanta, and it worked. Because Coke saw that the community wanted that blast from the past, they brought back Surge exclusively on Amazon, and they sell it for $35 for a 12-pack, and people are buying it. It has almost 5 stars on Amazon, so it was a complete success for Coke because they listened to the fact that their audience wanted that nostalgic feeling in their products. And that brings us to the first poll. So Brent, do you want to go over the poll?
So first off, real quick before we jump into the poll, for me it was actually Jolt Cola. I don't know if people remember Jolt, but
Yeah.
Jolt was interesting because when you opened it and looked down inside, it looked like oil on top. because it had the little like the rainbow of colors floating on there, so you knew you were about to drink something that was probably not exactly good for you. But it makes a good point is that sometimes with nostalgia, you definitely want to get the right era. But another thing to consider is what was actually nostalgic for the majority of people in that era. And in your
Correct.
audience, because sometimes people's personal connections might not be the same as that everybody else's. So a little research probably helps people to find that out. So first poll question: have you ever used nostalgia themes in your marketing? Yes, no, no, but we want to. And let me throw up the poll question so that you can actually vote on it instead of just reading it off the slide. I'll give everybody probably about another 20 or 30 seconds just to kind of get in there and make their vote. It's not super complicated one. Yes, no, no, but I want to. Have you ever used nostalgia in your marketing before? Um, Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close in a couple seconds for any last minute straggling votes. So as you can see, there's a small, maybe 1/3 of people have actually used nostalgia in their marketing, and about a quarter of people have no intention to ever do so, which is interesting. But
Yeah, it looks like it's pretty split between a third said yes and a third said no, but they want to, which makes sense for why you're in the webinar.
right.
So hopefully some of the stuff we go over today can help you guys. So moving on, kind of drilling further down into how you can actually use nostalgia in your marketing, I wanted to talk a little bit about nostalgia in content and how you can use that. So incorporating this into your content can help you increase engagement and social sharing. Again, it's going to help you forge that emotional connection with your audience through your blog or any other content platforms you have. And then also, if you have a really long-standing company that has a long history, a rich history, you could also showcase that, and that is would be tied into nostalgia marketing. So one company that does a really good job of this is Ford, because they've been around, for over a century. They do a lot of throwback campaigns. They do a lot of events with their old cars, and that's just giving people that feeling of, oh, I remember riding in, my dad's 19 whatever Ford Galaxy or whatever. So that's a really cool way to bring nostalgia into your marketing, is to dig into your company archives, which I'm going to give some examples of a little bit later. So one really good and popular content platform that I wanted to talk about today was BuzzFeed. So the way that BuzzFeed mainly generates income is that they have brand publishing partners. So these brand publishers will collaborate with the BuzzFeed team on creating branded content pieces. So these pieces are blog posts, just like a non-branded organic post would be on BuzzFeed's site, but it's really targeted to a specific niche that the brand publisher is going after. So in this example, the title was 14 Things Everyone Who Grew Up in Canada Will Remember. So even though BuzzFeed gets, I think it's 200 million unique views a month, probably a small sliver of that is people who grew up in Canada or who live in Canada now, but that's who the targeter or the brand publisher wanted to target, which in this case is McCain Deep and Delicious Cakes. So the article went through several examples of really specific things that only happen in Canada. So one example here is the toonie, which is the I think it's the $2 coin for Canada. I'm not from Canada, so I think that's just the slang term for the $2 coin. So that just kind of started fairly recently, and so that's something that many people in their childhood would probably remember because it was created while they were growing up. And after the different, how you can find out or how you only know you're from Canada, after they went through a couple examples, then at the end of the post, of course, the brand publisher, McCain Deep and Delicious Cakes, included themselves as their last reason. And because it's a kind of a long-standing brand that has a history in Canada, that totally fit in with the article. And so we had to look up what McCain Deep and Delicious Cakes were, because all of us on our team didn't know what it was, and it turns out there are these really thick cakes that are already made, so you can do, cookies and cream or chocolate or whatever, and you just buy them. And so they have this really rich feeling that I think kind of ties back to the theme of nostalgia nicely. Another really good example is Bustle. So Bustle does a lot of organic content with a nostalgia tie-in for their target audience, which is mainly millennials and a little bit of Generation Z, which is anyone under 21 right now. So they're a women's lifestyle site. They also do fashion, beauty tips, entertainment, pop culture. So in this article, the title was 10 Summer Songs from the 90s That Will Make You Totally Nostalgic. So this is right up my alley, of course. You know, I grew up in the 90s, so of course I read the article. And one thing that they did really well is they didn't just list the songs and then just leave it at that. They actually embedded the music videos for each of the songs, which is from YouTube, which is super easy to do. But it really worked because then, like, let's say I had forgotten about TLC's Waterfalls, which I don't know who would forget about that, but let's say I did. Well, if the music video is right in the post, I can be like, oh, awesome. Forgot about that song. I want to play it. So that's increasing time on site because I'm going to be listening to all these music videos now directly from the blog post because the video is embedded and it's not taking me to YouTube. So, you know, if they have a related post widget at the bottom that linked to other nostalgic content, that'd be a really cool way for them to keep users on site because they're drawn by that nostalgic feeling, especially if they're looking for a break in their workday. Nostalgic content is usually something that should be fun, should be, you know, create a sense of history and community. And so I think Bustle did a really good job with this example.
One of the cool things also, we had talked about before as well is that, a lot of people do collaborative polls of nostalgia content, but you can also apply almost all these nostalgic themes to your own content, right? The music, when you're actually creating content, you can apply it quite well. But one of the things I think people really need to grab onto is everybody's bought into the idea of current events, right? It's like, oh, Game of Thrones is out. We have to make a ton of content about Game of Thrones. The thing is the emotional connection with nostalgic content is the same as current events, right? So if you're connecting to something like this, people are going to share it a ton. They're going to link to it. They're going to talk about it. They're going to especially share it with specific friends who they know are going to like that content. Similar to how current events would work with like a Game of Thrones type thing. But the difference is competitive nature. When you're creating nostalgia content, you're not competing with anybody else. So you get the entire limelight for that initial effort, where when you're doing current events, you're competing with hundreds of other people. So kind of leads us to our second poll, which is, do you think nostalgic content is effective? Simple questions, simple answers, yes, no, or it depends on the industry. Do you think that nostalgic content is effective? And we'll leave this up for another, 20 seconds or so, just to give people a chance to cast their vote and to think about it. And then we'll post the results and see what people are thinking.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really curious to see the answers on this one.
All right.
I think it could work for almost any industry. It just depends on what you're creating.
Yeah, I would agree most on any content creation, right? Just doing social media, we've seen that, you can come up with, I've seen companies do fun stuff for a company that made screws, where they were like, how to screw things, right? How to screw up projects, how to, they did a whole thing on screws. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. So there was a urinal company that did one of the biggest social promotions, got millions of, visits and doing different unique urinals from around the world. So let's go ahead and share the results on that. Well, I think that it's pretty clear that people definitely think it's effective in one way or another. Pretty split with whether it depends on the industry or not, but still, very effective, yes.
Awesome. Yeah, good to know. So let's move on to nostalgia and social media and how you can use these themes in your social media strategies. So first, Brent kind of lightly touched on this, but nostalgia can be used for new content as well as sharing old content. So, in addition to sharing old images, which I'm going to give examples a little bit later in this section, you can also use that nostalgic feeling to create new content. So, let's say if you did a music video that was industry specific, but you did it in the style of 1940s jazz or something like that. That'd be tying nostalgia into new content. or if you did an infographic on, like Brent said, if you were a urinal company, urinals in the history, that'd kind of be a combination of creating new, so you're creating the infographic with the history, but then you're also tying in the past. So think of not only resharing what's already happened in the past, but also how you can create that spin for your new content as well. If you are looking for different things to share, I would recommend your old company archives, past industry videos, maybe on YouTube. If there was this really epic training video that your company had in the 80s with like awesome 80s fashions, maybe you could not only share that, but if you wanted to create new content, you could then recreate it and do everybody would be an 80s style and kind of update it with the new, safety guidelines, but it's a throwback to the original video. That'd be something really cool and way more interesting than just a traditional safety video. Another point I really wanted to touch on is when it comes to social media specifically, photos should always be the main focus, photos and video. It's been proven in lots of studies that photos and video posts on any social media platform usually get a lot more clicks and engagement than just text-based posts. And obviously with nostalgia, you're going to be sharing that type of media anyway, so it works out. So I wanted to go over a couple examples that I've seen of really good social media nostalgia marketing campaigns. So the first one, going back to combing the company archives. The New York Times actually has a Twitter account and a separate subdomain on their website for their archives. So they will look through current events that are happening now in the country or even New York City in particular, and create an archive post about it. So in this example, last month and in April, most juniors and seniors in high school in the US were going to prom. So they did a whole article on what prom was like in the 70s. They had photos from actual coverage that they did. They did a whole kind of time machine post on what the trends were, what people wore, what they did before and after, the activities, and it's just really cool to see that the New York Times covered that and to see, what prom was like back then versus now. So it kind of has that tie-in into current events, which is what Brent had mentioned earlier as well. Another really for creating that new content is if you're creating industry events, you should see if you can kind of build a nostalgic theme into it. So Kansas City, which is where I live, they have a really rich history with our baseball team. We have the Royals now, so they were in the World Series last year. So the Royals, they were always popular in Kansas City, but even now people love going to the games, having fun, things like that. So one thing that they did at the start of this season is the Royals held a throwback night to one of the former baseball teams that were in Kansas City called the Monarchs. And so they said, hey, we're doing this retro theme to honor the Monarchs team, dressed as, as people did in that period, which I believe was the 30s and 40s. So as you can see on this photo, which was taken at the stadium, a couple of friends just went, dressed up as their favorite outfits from the 30s and 40s and had their photo taken with an impersonator at the event. And then that was shared on Twitter with the unique hashtag that the Royals had come up with for that specific night. And that is just a wealth of content that people are going to be sharing online that then you can capture and reshare on your own social media channels. You could do a roundup post, here's our favorite photos from our throwback night at the stadium or, at our office or whatever. That's a really cool way to kind of crowdsource content is if you do a nostalgic event and then just ask people to share with a unique hashtag so it's really easy to track. And this was another thing, I talked about a little bit earlier. So create your own content. So this could be infographics that you're then sharing on social. You could do little, meme-worthy images. So in this example, it brings back, back in the day when email first started 10 years ago, you were excited to get an email. You thought it was awesome. Now you're probably sick of getting email. It just comes and comes, at least for me. And you love getting, a card in the mail that makes your day. So this type of feeling of comparing the past versus the present and how we feel back then versus now has a really strong pull when it comes to social media and the images you're posting. Here's another example of an infographic that was created. So This company, HostGator, they did an infographic about what kids did in the past versus the internet generation. So, baby boomers and Generation X, they didn't have the internet. So what they do for fun, how did they grow up versus now? How are our children using the internet and technology to shape what they do with their everyday school, fun events, social events, how they communicate. And so it's a really cool way, again, to compare the past to the present, but in a new type of content. And that brings us to our third poll question. I don't know if Brent is here. Brent?
I'm here. Sorry about that. Just had it on mute. Forgot. So third poll, last poll we're going to do. Quick question for you. Does nostalgia marketing work better for content or social media? Very opinion-based question, but one I'm very interested to see what people respond with. So I'm going to toss up the actual poll, give everyone about 30 seconds or so. That one picture you had a minute ago with the emails thing. When I first saw that, I split laughing hard. That was so funny because it's so true. Like back in the day,
so true.
you get, I was back in the AOL days, so it was like, you've got mail, and it was like, ooh, what did I got, and then like now it's like 300 mails, geez,
I know, it gets exhausting having to keep up with it.
So our poll, does nostalgia marketing work better for content or social media? Content, social media, or both? We're going to go ahead and close this out and share the results. A small fraction for content, a chunk for social media, and a lot saying for both. And I would agree that it works really well for both. It works, across the board, in my opinion, quite well.
Yeah, and you can also, cross-reference between the two. If you create images for a blog post, then of course that'd be great to share on social. So it's really easy to, utilize both in an overall nostalgic marketing campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, since we went through content marketing and social media, I wanted to kind of go through some overall do's and don'ts when it comes to nostalgia marketing. So one really important thing I want to stress is that nostalgic content is best created by people who lived in the decade that you're creating the content about, or lived in, the country, if it was like our BuzzFeed Canada example, versus an American. So in the BuzzFeed example, I couldn't have written that article because I didn't grow up in Canada. So there's little things, about the toonie that maybe I just wouldn't have thought of. Likewise, since I'm a millennial, it wouldn't make sense for me to do, a retro throwback post about the 30s, 20 awesome toys from the 30s. I mean, I could do some research and come up with a few, maybe 10, but it'd be so much easier for someone who grew up during that time to be able to talk about it. So I would recommend, at least having input from people who grew up in the time period that you're trying to create content around. If you don't know really where to get started, I recommend utilizing current events, holidays, trends in order to kind of provide a jumping off board when it comes to the content creation. So a really good example is if you wanted to do something about Christmas, again, you could say, 15 amazing toys we missed from the 90s that you always wanted to get at Christmas. That's kind of a long title, but you know where I'm going with this. So you could do, 15 toys that were really, really popular in the 90s that they don't make anymore, that, kids were always wanting in their, in their stockings in the morning.
Or something
I know for my brother.
Something like Christmas commercials, then and now, right? You can do a lot of then and now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say for my brother, he always wanted Tickle Me Elmo. That was like huge in the 90s. So just little like cool toys that maybe people wouldn't have remembered unless you reminded them, and tie that into what's happening now.
Oh, and you could totally, just on that one right there, you could totally run with that and be like the toys that you couldn't get. Like all the Christmas toys you couldn't get.
Yep, or always sold out. Tickle Me Elmo was always sold out. It drove my mom nuts. So, and again, consider your audience. Create content that they'll like from when they're in elementary school up to high school. So again, ages 6 to 16 is kind of the sweet spot when it comes to figuring out what decade you want to focus on. A couple don'ts. So when it comes to nostalgic content and social media, You want to make sure it fits your niche, or else it's going to seem like newsjacking. Newsjacking is basically when brands take something that's trending on social media or a trending hashtag and try to tie in their products to it, and it's blown up in so many companies' faces. That's probably a whole other webinar. But basically, even though we know nostalgia marketing works fairly well, it has to be specific to your niche and your industry, or else it's just going to come off as like cheesy and that you're trying too hard. And again, it also needs to be unique to your company. So just because something, you know, works for your audience and it's been on BuzzFeed, then that doesn't mean you should copy it and it would work for you and your company. So try to be really specific. Try to think of ways that you can position the content where it's unique to your company and what you provide versus what's worked for everyone else in the past. And then finally, I wanted to wrap up with a few more key takeaways. So nostalgia makes your audience want to connect with you. It takes them back to less stressful times in their life where they were happy and they had their friends, you know, down the block playing with their favorite toys. So it gives that connection because you, as the publisher and your audience, you're both saying that you grew up in that time period. So it's just something you have in common with your consumers, your audience, that then you can share and talk about together. And that takes me to my second point. Nostalgia and content's a great way to drive traffic and engagement. So you're going to see a lot more people likely in the comments or in social media replying saying, oh my God, I remember Tickle Me Elmo. I loved it so much. It was awesome. Or, you know, Tickle Me Elmo sucked. The voice box failed, and it sounded like it was the devil, which is the true thing that happened. So it's just going to have people come up and want to share their own experiences with your content, and that's just an awesome way to engage them. And when you do engage, make sure it's not salesy, like, oh, well, you like Tickle Me Elmo? You should try our, you know, teddy bear that talks too. We have it now. I mean, there's a difference between trying too hard and trying to slip your brand in whenever you can, and just making it a natural part of the conversation, like McCain Deep and Delicious Cakes did with the BuzzFeed example. And then finally, that kind of ties it all together. Don't make your nostalgia cheesy or make it seem like you're trying too hard or trying to be cool, because people pick up on that. Because nostalgia is so precious to all of us, you want to take it as precious too. And so you want it to be genuine content that people can just reminisce about together and have a laugh about versus taking advantage of that feeling. So I just caution you to be careful as well. And that's all I have. So thank you so much for taking this trip down memory road with me. If you want to talk to me later, there's my social media profiles. I'm always happy to answer questions. If you want to ask anything later, you can always use the SEJ Think Tank hashtag as well.
Awesome. Thank you for the great information. I think, I think nostalgia is one of those things that, I kind of forgot about for a while, really utilizing. You see it and you recognize it, but to really think about it as a part of the marketing plan. I think the biggest touch on the final bit was the engagement. That's the biggest factor right now in most of the algos and most of the success metrics, with social media, is that engagement level. And I think it's tough to get people to interact even on current events, but it's very easy to get that interaction with nostalgia. So I think it's a good point for everybody to really take away that, this is something that they can all do, and it's something they all should be doing. Speaking of great information as well, I want to take this moment to plug our next webinar. We have a really interesting webinar coming up next by John Ball. And he's going to be talking about the value of link building and online marketing. I mean, look, link building has come, a long way with discussions and different elements of it. And if you're wondering today, what should I still be doing? What's still effective? What's, bad? What's good? John Ball is going to come on and really break all that down for us. It's going to be on June 17th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Definitely worth checking out. We have a bit of information, a bit of time left, and so we want to jump into a little bit of Q&A. I want to just remind everybody that we are using the hashtag SEJ Think Tank. You can post the questions in the webinar or on Twitter. We're going to use the time that we have to answer them. Any of the questions we don't get to, we're still going to answer afterwards. So please throw up any questions that you have for this. And jumping into that, let's look at our first question, an interesting one. This is from Greg, who wanted to ask, what would you say is the most challenging issues you've found using nostalgia marketing? If you have any, if there are any.
I think it goes back to marketers wanting to take advantage of it. So I think as marketers, we naturally want to squeeze the juice out of everything we can. And again, like I said, I think because nostalgia has such like this sparkly, warm, fuzzy feeling associated with it, you have to be really careful to not overdo it or make it seem too disingenuous. So let's say if you had a company, if you had the screw company, like Brent said, it wouldn't make sense to have a blog post on your article, or sorry, a blog post on your blog that was, 90s music videos that rocked out. Like that's not tying it into what you sell, which is screws. So keeping it as closely related as possible to your industry and what you provide is a struggle I see many companies going through. And so I think that that's probably the biggest challenge, is just coming up with the best way to tie it into your industry, especially if you don't have something relatively easy to tie into, like fashion would be something so easy to use nostalgia marketing for. If your industry is something, more B2B or more industrial, it's a little bit harder to create that content.
Yeah, and that would be my exact answer is the same. The only thing I would say to kind of challenge, to solve that challenge of, even with the screw company, you could go back and find like maybe Seinfeld or something has a bunch of scenes where they're, doing some construction. Or there was that one show back in the day, remember Home Improvement? Was such a with Tim
Yes,
Allen.
full
Like you
time.
could find a ton of things with them doing
Yeah.
screws and stuff like that. So they could put a whole skit together about screws with home improvement, tie it back to doing actual home improvement with the screws. It would be so regardless the industry, it's just being creative, and I think that's the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, good call. Good
Next
idea.
question from Janelle. What do you think about Throwback Thursdays? Classic TBT.
I think it's awesome. I think it's a really cool way to create a quick nostalgic, piece of nostalgic content that ties in with something that's usually trending, which is, the hashtag TBT. Again, you don't want to jacket and be like, oh, TBT to our post last week. That's not really what Throwback Thursday was meant for, or Flashback Friday, along the same lines. You want to take it back to as far as you can. So, no matter your industry, you again could go through your company's archives and say, Flashback Friday to our first ever staff meeting at, I don't know, Red Curtain Marketing Group. And it is, people in their totally like 90s, or 80s shoulder pads, meeting at this conference table. That's something that's totally a really awesome Flashback Friday or Throwback Thursday, and it ties into your company's history, and it's not seeming like you're trying to newsjack the hashtag for that day.
Yeah, and I would further just add to the, not overdoing it. People, they get into this and they're like, every Thursday, I've got to have a Throwback Thursday, right? It's like every Thursday, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to. Any type of content that you're doing, you want to sparse it out and you want to make sure you're not overusing it. So, I would really recommend not trying to do it every Thursday, and just throw it in there when you really have something worth putting in.
Exactly, and that goes the same for nostalgia content in general. I mean, you don't want every post on your blog or your Facebook page to be nostalgic. You just want, this is just a strategy that you can mix in with everything else you're already doing.
Absolutely. From Tara, how can you blog or create nostalgic marketing campaigns without violating their IP, the intellectual property, the copyright elements? How do you do this without getting in trouble for it, essentially?
So if you're wanting to share content that doesn't belong to your company, I recommend going the Creative Commons route. So Wikimedia Commons, which is sort of the image library arm of Wikipedia. All of their images are Creative Commons licensed, which means you can use it in an editorial viewpoint. So you'll have to check, and Creative Commons is a whole other, again, probably a whole other webinar. But there's two types. There's editorial and promotional. So make sure that you're not using it at any content that they say is only for editorial. Make sure you use it for the right purpose, but anything that's flagged as Creative Commons is a good way to find content. So Wikimedia Commons, like I said, PhotoPin is another good Creative Commons search engine. Pixabay is also a free image site that I have had good luck with that is Creative Commons licensed. Another thing that we've also done at SEJ is if somebody is sharing content from another website or company, or if they want to share it, we just ask the company if we can use it. We'll say, hey, you have this really awesome photo. Can we just share it on our site? This is what the post is about that we're sharing it in. And you'd be surprised at how many people are okay with it as long as you link back to the source. So even just asking, you'd be surprised, again, at how many people just say that's fine.
So two things that I would say. One, I think that if you're a company that's really doing serious marketing and you're going to go through this, there's a lot of internet legal companies out there today. It's a whole practice that's kind of opened up. I can't imagine it would cost more than a couple $100 to have a 2-hour or 1-hour conversation with some of these people and just simply ask them the question of like, this is our industry, this is what we're trying to do, what's our legal ramifications. What you'll find is that there's fan art, so you can illustrate or recreate. So if you're taking nostalgia themes, you can run with them pretty openly. The real problem is with copyright is when you're trying to pass off something as your own. Like this is my thing, right? Not so much when you're doing something that's fan related. So if you're taking a theme and making a video, if you're recreating some graphics, there's a lot of people that falls underneath the fan art creation. But there's some legal stuff there as well as when a brand has public, things like YouTube videos, you can grab them off YouTube. Yeah. YouTube kind of protects you from that because that's YouTube's responsibility, right? Same thing for music, exactly. Those other areas. So it's really, I would really recommend taking an hour and talking to a legal company about this and really set yourself up for the next 5 years of feeling comfortable. But beyond that, there's a lot of options for you.
There's also, I don't remember the cutoff. It's a rolling deadline. I want to say it's about 100. Any content created over 100 years ago is free to use. And I don't know the exact specifics. It's an estimate, so you'd have to check. But Lewis Carroll's original artwork from Alice in Wonderland, anyone can use that now because I think it was created in the late 1800s. And so if you're going to kick it back far and you want to use original artwork from books or newspapers, and it was in the 1800s or I think early 1900s, sometimes that is anyone can use that. Sherlock Holmes, all those stories are now what's the word? It's like open source or open property. Anyone can use those stories and reformat them and rework them. So that's another cool idea to find content as well, that there isn't really any legal restrictions, but again, you'd have to check on the cutoff date. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah, good point. So here's an interesting comment from Bev. She, first off, she says, nice job, you're doing, a great webinar. But she has a thought. She says she's 50, and while she romances her teen years, as a parent, she was respond even more to the years of her children, right? The next generation moments that she still remembers. Same thing as me, as I remember these kids shows and these kids songs, like they're in my head still from my kids, right? So what is your thoughts about, involving both, your own personal experiences and potentially your children's experiences?
Well, I think you should definitely look in. That's probably like parenting nostalgia or something like that, because you then have nostalgia over again because you're basically reliving a childhood and teenage year period through your child. And so if your company was sold things to children or marketed to teens or whatever, then it would make sense to target the parents of those teens as well, based on the nostalgia that they may have for when their kids were growing up. So I would say it definitely would probably work best if you're trying to target parents, to take that angle of maybe the second wave of nostalgia. Um, I will say too, kind of broadening that sort of idea, you can also, write content about nostalgia from when people had a huge event in their life. So, I bought my first house, I think it was 4 years ago this month. So, an article that says, 20 things you didn't know until you bought your first house, that's going to trigger nostalgia in me because I'm going to say, oh, I remember when I bought my first house and I had no idea, I had to pay PMI or all this stuff. That's kind of taking advantage of that second wave of nostalgia because I'm remembering a big event in my life and kind of reliving it again. So if you want to branch out, beyond people's childhood and teen years or their kids' teen years or childhood, you could also think about life events and recall those times as well.
Yeah, I would say, Bev, really good point. It's a great additional kind of demographic add-on that's like, hey, don't forget, you can also, target,
Yeah.
different groups. So I think it's a really good point. The thought I have is just simply, it's a really good point. It's something people should definitely consider. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
checking, maybe we got time for more. I'm going to go ahead and give us one more, and then I'll get word on how much more time we have. Any stories about fails, anything that could be used as an example that people could look up and say, this is a really bad example of using nostalgia, something to showcase as to avoid.
Oh, geez. I'm trying to think. Um, I can't think of any specific examples, but the first thing that comes to mind is something if the practice was stopped back in the day, then maybe there was a reason. So, I don't know, like if they stopped making a toy, you should make sure that they didn't stop making it because it was real because children died from ingesting the stuffing of this bear or
Or
something.
or they're
You want
also
to
get
make
into,
sure.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, the main issues, feminism, race
Yep.
issues, any of the things that could be tied back to a time period, you always have to be careful of. But I mean, really, the biggest fail is when people don't think things through. They don't think these things through. They don't look at the potential negatives, and then they don't, do a quality campaign, and then they kind of get, kind of slammed for that. So, but I think that has to do with just about all of your marketing campaigns in general. Is you have to be aware of the negative stigmas that apply to those topics.
Exactly. Like one example I keep thinking of is there was a soda, I think in the 80s called AIDS, AIDS, and obviously that was discontinued because of AIDS, the disease. So you're obviously not going to create a nostalgia campaign about AIDS, the soda, because that's a really hot topic for the sufferers of this actual disease. So it's just kind of being aware of, of what was happening then and what's still happening now. So, our country and everybody's country has a history of certain things happening that, you probably don't want to bring up again. Like, obviously, nobody should be doing nostalgia campaigns about 9/11 or something like that. It's just, like you said, being aware of how people still feel about things, even if they happened 50 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. You need to have your, thumb on the pulse of how people are going to react to it instead of focusing on, oh, that'd be cool to talk about again. We should bring that up.
All right. Another question. Is there a monetary value to nostalgia marketing? I don't. I'm guessing the question's a little strange to me, just in the regard of like what it specifically means. The only way I could see, I would answer that would be that there's monetary value to any marketing, depending on if it's driving ROI. I think this, you said it best earlier. Nostalgia marketing is just another element of an overall marketing. It's another strategy that fits into an overall marketing campaign, and an overall marketing campaign should have a monetary or a ROI value, and nostalgia should just be one way of getting it out there.
Exactly. It's more of a style of content versus like obviously PPC is a vertical versus organic search. Like those are verticals that you can track, but you could have nostalgic elements in both of those. You know what I mean? So it's more of like a style or a lens through which to create content or post content versus, a different vertical of marketing.
That doesn't mean you can't make money on something. I mean, you could definitely probably go out and make nostalgia today, Twitter and Facebook, pages and stuff, and start focusing really heavily on nostalgia and doing something like on this day 20 years ago. There's a lot of things you could probably do to build, a monetary system out of it, but, that's any business model you would create, would have.
Yeah, or I mean, like if you were like a clothing manufacturer and you did a blog post about 15 awesome fanny packs from history, and then you had a link at the bottom that was like, check out our fanny packs as throwbacks, like you could tie it into products that you offer, and that kind of goes back to the urinal example of you're offering examples of urinals in history. Well, then you could link to the urinals that you offer now. It's kind of tying into what you offer now that fits in naturally with the content that you're creating.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to cut there. We've run a little over time. That's okay, but we'll go ahead and we're going to make sure we have a couple more questions in here. We'll make sure that we get them to Kelsey, and we'll get them answered up on Twitter and also in the recap post. Again, you can use the hashtag SEJ Think Tank. Continue asking your questions, even if you have one 30 minutes from now, whatever. Post it. We'll do our best to answer them. And also, please remember, John Ball. Going to be on June 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time talking about link building. Definitely going to want to check it out. And thank you very much, Kelsey, for this great presentation on nostalgia. I think that people will really walk away with a lot of good takeaways from this.
Awesome. Good. And thank you, Brent.
All right, everyone. Thank you. And we'll see you again next time.